Shannon here. I decided to make a video for beginners, basically to help them memorize, find their way through cognitive processes for every single personality type, and just kind of some hints and some ground rules that will help them memorize and determine everybody's cognitive process. Okay, so I'm just going to dive right in because I don't have a script to this really. So since this is for beginners, I would like to just explain really quickly cognitive processes. Basically, with cognitive processes, since there are 16 personality types, you're going to have 8 cognitive processes. And there's no J or P in cognitive processes because the J and the P's determine the attitudes of the preferences, which means is the function, the process, is it going to be extroverted or introverted? Okay, so we have access to all 8 of these cognitive processes. It's just that we all use them in a different order. So, for example, just to lay out some groundwork for this, let's take an ESTP. Okay, since first of all, this is their dominant cognitive process, their auxiliary cognitive process, their tertiary cognitive process, and their inferior, which comes in last. If you notice, there's a line and then there's 4 other cognitive processes. So since we use 8 cognitive processes, this is going to be their shadow functions. Okay, so just keep in mind that if you can figure out the first primary 4 cognitive processes that are used for every personality type, all you have to do to figure out their shadow functions is flip it, the complete opposite. So a complete opposite of an extroverted, as far as attitude style, I would like to say, the complete opposite attitude style of an extroverted sensing is going to be introverted sensing. And so you just kind of follow the pattern along. So that's really easy to figure out there. So if you can figure out the dominant and the auxiliary cognitive processes in the personality type, the rest is going to be easy from there because there's some rules, basic rules, okay, that apply to this. So to find the auxiliary, or to find the dominant and the auxiliary, we have to focus in on the J and the P, and if it's of an introvert and if it's of an extrovert, because that's going to change where it's going to change a little bit of the order. Okay, so rules here. Okay, so for it doesn't matter if they're an extrovert or if they're an introvert. To find for every type the dominant and the auxiliary process, okay, are in opposite attitudes, which means that for extroverts, their dominant function is extroverted and their auxiliary function is introverted. Okay, introvert, dominant function is introverted, auxiliary function is extroverted. I did said that earlier, I believe. So when the JP always points to the function that is extroverted, right? J's always point to the 3rd letter in the personality type. It doesn't matter if they're an extrovert or they're introvert. If they have a J, the 3rd letter. Okay, if they have a P, doesn't matter if they're introverted or extroverted, it's going to point to their 2nd letter. So that's how you can find the extroverted cognitive process. So for extroverts, it's going to be your first dominant cognitive process. For introverts, it's going to be your 2nd. Right? Does it make a lot of sense for an introvert to have an extroverted cognitive process used primarily and dominantly? Therefore, that would make them extroverted. So that's how that works. So back to here. Since I explained that, something that also will help you memorize cognitive processes a little bit easier is that there are going to be 4 personality types that have the same primary cognitive processes in common, just in different orders. So like with an ESTP and an ISTP, okay, since they're cousin types, they're going to use almost the same cognitive processes, but just flipped. So since it's like, for an example, an ISTP, they're going to primarily use their dominant function is introverted thinking, and their auxiliary is extroverted sensing. So you just flip it for an ESTP. You just flip those, right? So if you notice here, again, you flip their tertiary and their inferior functions. You just flip it. Why is that? Why can't they be in the same order? Well, basically, the third function, the tertiary, is the opposite of the auxiliary. Okay, so the fourth inferior function is the opposite of the dominant. So the auxiliary, the tertiary, and the inferior are all in the same attitude. Okay? So, something else, just remember, like, for example, an ESFP and an INTJ, they are the complete opposite personality types, but their cognitive processes, not only are they similar, but they're just flipped. An INTJ, introverted intuition, extroverted thinking, introverted feeling, extroverted sensing, flip it. So for an ESFP, extroverted sensing, introverted feeling, extroverted thinking, introverted intuition. So between an ESFP and an ISFP, and in their complete opposite types, ENTJ and INTJ, they all use these cognitive processes in common, just in different orders. So this applies to every personality type. Just all you have to do is just break it down into that 4 quadrants, like I have done here, and just split them off and put them in there like that, because if they have those cognitive processes in common, well, you're going to be able to memorize them a little bit easier, and you're just going to have to figure out their J and their P and the letters that you find for their extroverted, their first use of an extroverted cognitive process. Okay, so that's what's really is going to help here. Just try to figure out the first cognitive process that is extroverted, which is going to be in their dominant use position or in their auxiliary use position, all depending if they're an extrovert or an introvert. Okay, so just really quickly, I'll wrap it up before I get too repetitive here and it gets all boring. Just remember, terminology, attitude, it just means extroverted or introverted. Function, all that means is that it's excluding introvert and extrovert in judging and perceiving, which is going to be the 4 functions of sensing, intuition, thinking, and feeling. Okay, so also when it says type formula, that means that they're 4-letter personality types. Okay, that's all that means. So just remember with these ground rules here, always bottom line rule no matter what, that the J and the P always point to the dominant of extroverts, their first cognitive process. And the J and the P is always going to point to the auxiliary position of introverts. Okay, so if you can just memorize that, you'll be able to figure out cognitive processes and the order in which they belong for each personality type. Really hope that you can memorize the definitions of cognitive processes and what each of them means, because it's really going to help you learn more about each personality type and their hardwiring and why they do certain things and why they see something this way. But just remember that we're all unique and we don't fit in one box. And just because I'm an INFJ doesn't mean that everything in my INFJ profile is what I do. It's not. I also wanted to point out that sometimes we may have difficulty pinning down what personality type we are, and sometimes it's because we may have just developed a certain cognitive process and it's a little bit more dominant than our other cognitive processes, and so that can make us unbalanced, and it can also just, you don't want to be unbalanced, and you want to be balanced by developing your shadow functions. So maybe I'll make another video later on about how to develop and balance out a little bit more of your shadow functions, so that you can be a whole person and that you can have access to all processes no matter what and feel comfortable using them. So have a good day. Hope it helped.